Congratulations! You've just overthrown the Empire, or won the Battle of the Trident, or consolidated the 24 warring houses. However you've done it, you have united a large part of Westeros, Middle-earth, our Earth, the galaxy, or whatever, under a single banner. But now you must decide what goes on that banner, and that's where things get tricky. Flags, emblems, and insignia are, in my opinion, one of the coolest aspects of world building, but for whatever reason, they are often overlooked, even within some of the most prominent franchises. So in today's episode of Incoming, I'd like to give a quick overview of what makes a good flag or emblem, what makes a crappy one, and give you some examples of each from across science fiction and fantasy. Now, there are a ton of resources available on how to design a good flag, but generally you want to follow these basic guidelines. Keep it simple. Use only 2 or 3 well-contrasting colors that would work equally well in black and white. No lettering or overly complex seals. Be distinctive. And perhaps most importantly, use meaningful symbolism. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule, and some of the most famous and recognizable flags break these guidelines. But for the sake of simplicity, these are the criteria I'm going to be using. Just as an example, let's take a look at a flag that we're all probably familiar with. The emblem and flag of the United Nations is maybe one of the most deliberated designs in human history. After all, it is not representing a single nation or people, but all of us. The background is a field of blue, generally thought of as the opposite of red, the color of war and blood, and incidentally, the color of the sky, which is the same for everyone on Earth. The center emblem is a projection of the Earth as seen from the North Pole, bisected by the prime meridian and the international dateline. There is a wreath consisting of twin branches of an olive tree, generally used as another symbol of peace. The main takeaway here should be just how much thought went into this design and how nothing is arbitrary. The globe is positioned in such a way that no single country or landmass or even hemisphere is portrayed as superior or more prominent than any other. This is exactly the sort of thing you want to take into account when you're coming up with symbolism on a planetary scale, and it's also something that designs from science fiction mess up all the time. Alright, so now on to the main event. I've selected 6 emblems or flags that I think are some of the best designs in science fiction and fantasy. I've also selected another 6 that I think are just awful. And just for fun, I've thrown in another few designs at the end that I think deserve special mention or break one of the aforementioned guidelines in a unique way. These aren't in any particular order, and of course these are just my personal opinions, which means that they are 100% undeniable facts because I and I alone sit atop a fortress of unassailable truth. I'm going to start with the emblem of the Klingon Empire from Star Trek. This is one of the most iconic and enduring designs in science fiction, and I think for good reason. It is bold, aggressive, and maybe even vaguely fascist, evoking subtle comparisons to the Nazi swastika. Even if you know nothing about Klingon culture, you can make some good guesses on what type of society they are based on this emblem alone. There have been a few explanations in non-canon sources as to what the symbol represents: the 3 blades laid before Kalis as a symbol of fealty, the 3 most important qualities of a warrior: honor, duty, sacrifice. But with the Klingon Empire and other alien designs featured in this video, I can cut them a lot of slack when it comes to symbolism. The fact that different authors can interpret and rationalize different meanings from this symbol is good enough for me. Star Trek in general, I believe, is the gold standard for emblem design. The Klingon emblem is the most iconic, but I think you could very easily make a case as to why the Federation, Romulan, Cardassian, Dominion, or Borg emblems deserve to be considered among the best designs in fiction. Even the more minor races like the Andorians, Trail, Breen, the Maquis all get wonderfully distinctive emblems. When you compare these to similar designs that came out of the 1990s, they are wildly successful. Alright, moving on. Compared to Star Trek, Star Wars is a bit more hit and miss when it comes to well-designed flags and emblems. I feel the First Order earns a spot on my list, however, for their extremely prominent emblem we first saw in The Force Awakens. Now, I don't think the First Order necessarily has the best designed emblem in Star Wars. I think that honor might go towards Black Sun, but I really appreciate how the First Order incorporates details from its predecessors, the Galactic Empire and the Galactic Republic, while remaining a bit more visually distinctive than either. The Empire and Republic both had very good designs individually, but when viewed side by side, I think it's all too easy to confuse the two, and neither had very much personality. Look at both of them from 10 feet away, and tell me which is which. Compared to Star Trek and Star Wars, Ace Combat is hardly a blip on the radar, but its flag designs are incredible, and as with Star Trek, almost anything from Ace Combat could be on this list. The best of the bunch, however, has to be the Federation of Ozia. There is really not too much to say about this flag, as there has never been much of an explanation as to its symbolism, but you can infer that the various stars represent states or provinces, and the design is just too elegant not to include. This might be my favorite flag of all time. Now, at the risk of repeating myself a bit here, Warhammer, both in its 41st Millennium and Fantasy incarnations, is a franchise that really understands the value of having cool symbols. There's tons of them. For the purpose of this list, I'm choosing the symbol of the Imperium, the Imperial Aquila, because of how developed it is within the lore and how it forms the basis of Imperial iconography that spans across every other Imperial organization. It's an extremely resilient and flexible symbol that always looks cool and intimidating no matter how it's modified. It can be simple, detailed, in black and white, or color. No matter what, the symbol works. The other major organizations of the Imperium all deserve recognition as well for great designs. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the Inquisition, the dozens of Space Marine chapters, and that's not even including the symbols of the Chaos Gods, Orc Tribes, Tau Seps. The Skaven from Fantasy are definitely up there as well. I really need to stop talking about Warhammer because when it comes to cool emblems, there's really no end to them, and we might be trapped here forever. Compared to science fiction, I think fantasy is at something of a disadvantage when it comes to cool designs. Flags from our own history, particularly those of the medieval period, are usually pretty simple and typically the same things over and over. A wolf, a bear, a castle, a dragon, whatever. That's not to say distinctive designs don't exist, they do. They're just a little more rare. With that in mind, the sigil of House Baratheon of Dragonstone from A Song of Ice and Fire is a fantastic design. Game of Thrones, of course, features hundreds of sigils, but this one appeals to me more than all the others because of its great symbolism. In selecting this emblem, Stannis Baratheon incorporated the fiery heart of the Lord of Light within the traditional stag of House Baratheon. This design not only looks awesome and makes sense within the world of Game of Thrones, but depending on your interpretation of Stannis' character, there might be some more subtle and sinister undertones to this imagery. And for the final entry in my good design list, I'd like to take a look at Weyland-Yutani from the Alien franchise. As a corporation rather than a traditional state, Weyland-Yutani can get away with something that usually doesn't work too well in designs like this, incorporating the initials of their name into their logo. When you're more concerned with brand recognition rather than meaningful symbolism, this is a good route to take. There are plenty of examples of company logos featuring their initials, but the integration between the two letters in Weyland-Yutani works incredibly well, and I think it's a very successful design. It also screams power and authority, and unlike similar designs, the letters aren't completely obvious and trick your brain a bit. Alright, so now that I've given you some examples of emblems and flags that work, let's move on to those that don't. I'm going to start with an example from one of my favorite science fiction franchises, and it breaks my heart to include them on this list. Remember how the designers of the UN emblem went to such great lengths to ensure that no single country was given prominence over any other? The Systems Alliance from Mass Effect screws this up completely. Their emblem features only North America, disregarding over 80% of the Earth's landmass and 90% of the total population in a single stroke, while Cuba, Iceland, and countless other islands are just missing entirely. And that's just Earth. Humanity's other colonies are completely unrepresented here. This is a mistake that pops up over and over in science fiction. I love Mass Effect, but I wish more attention had been given to designs like this. Of all the major races, I think the Alliance was the only one given an emblem, and it's not very good. I have seen a variation of the symbol that replaces Earth with 3 stars. That's an improvement, but it's still just kind of bland. Mass Effect deserves better. Next up, we have the Alliance from Firefly. There have been a couple variations of their flag design over the course of the series and then the movie, so I'll touch briefly on each one. Now, the first we saw was a combination of the US and Chinese flag, which kind of makes sense when you consider the history and origins of the Alliance. The problem is, combining the symbolism of 2 different flags tends to ruin the meaning behind both, creating a mishmash of ideas instead that doesn't quite work. Also, it tends to invite unwanted symbolism. In this case, is the United States meant to be absorbing China, or has China defaced the symbol of America? At some point, this flag was replaced with something even worse. Unfortunately, there aren't too many high-resolution examples of it, so please excuse the quality here. This is maybe my most hated design. It breaks just about every rule. It's visually complex and messy, it features way too many colors and even gradients, And the central eagle motif completely disregards the Chinese elements of the Alliance's civilization. Each planet in the Alliance was supposed to have their own version of this flag, with variations in the color of the stripes and the planets included, which just causes even greater confusion. Oddly enough, there is one Alliance symbol that appears briefly in Serenity that is actually pretty good. The eagle might be a bit cliche, but at least it's visually appealing and not overly complicated like all the other designs. It's also the only design from Firefly that actually works in black and white. I was so desperate to find a version of this symbol to use in our episode on the Alliance that I had to draft my roommate into making one in Illustrator. Anything to avoid that ugly rainbow eagle flag. Okay, now we've reached the point of the video where I am forced to disappoint my esteemed colleague over at Space Dock. I don't think the flag of the Martian Congressional Republic from the otherwise amazing show The Expanse is very good. The design is a good start, but the execution just doesn't work here. By having the central circle, which I expect represents Mars, be hollow, it comes across more as a ring than a planet. The red is also too dull to contrast effectively against either the orange or the black halves of the flag. And as for the blue sliver, it's too thin to be visually distinctive, and when viewed from a distance, or if you saw it blowing in the wind, it's doomed to be indistinguishable from the rest of the flag. Now, I'm guessing the blue sliver is included to represent the terraforming of Mars, and I've seen a few people suggest that the blue sliver might expand as progress is made. I'm not a huge fan of this either. It reduces the flag to something akin to one of those charity goal tracker thermometer things. And could you imagine how stupid you'd feel as a citizen of Mars if halfway through some disaster happened and you lost part of your flag's progress? Thankfully, we do have a solution. Reddit user TouchD33 has created a vastly superior alternative that still incorporates all the elements of the original design. Now we're moving on to another design that really screws up in the symbolism department. The seal of the Earth Alliance from Babylon 5 completely fails the test of inclusivity. 5,000 years of human history, and apparently the only defining symbol of our civilization, is just a stylized version of some initials that only works in one language, and comes across as just kind of cheap. There are too many colors, with 2 versions of blue, 2 versions of gray, and green over orange, which isn't particularly striking. Drop the initials, stick to just the torch, and consolidate the colors, and this might have worked. Next up is the flag of the Greater Nazi Reich from The Man in the High Castle. I want to start off in discussing this flag by saying I completely understand why this design was chosen. It is a striking image, and you get that great reveal in the first episode where a seemingly normal American flag waves in the wind to reveal a swastika. The design isn't bad, but it's kind of lazy, and the swastika doesn't work too well with the more rectangular field of blue. RVB O'Malley over at DeviantArt has come up with a way better alternative. This design is more balanced, more original, and I think just as effective, but you do lose that initial reveal though. The final entry in our list of shame is what inspired me to make this video in the first place, the logo of the United Empire of Earth from Star Citizen. Design-wise, it is completely adequate. But just like in some of our previous examples, the symbolism here is terrible and boring. Without knowing the name of the country, I doubt I could tell you what those initials actually are. They are just so stylized, and once again, it's in English. Apart from the olive branches, which are more or less cliche at this point, the design has no symbolism whatsoever. It's not even interesting enough to really tear into, there's just nothing to talk about here. Alright, so I'm going to end this video with just another few quick examples of flags that work despite breaking my initial guidelines. First up, the flag of the United Citizens Federation from Starship Troopers. Combining an eagle with a bomber is ridiculous and corny and overly militaristic, but it makes perfect sense for the state symbol of a nation like the Federation. Next is Ol' Freebie, or the Flag of Earth in Futurama. I shouldn't have to explain this one too deeply. It takes everything wrong with designs like the Systems Alliance and plays it for laughs. Our last one is the emblem of Hydra from the Marvel Universe. I love this design, it's great, it perfectly matches the operating philosophy of the organization. But it's also the logo of a group that has dropped any pretenses of not being completely evil. If you worked at Hydra as a lower level employee or maybe as a mid-level manager, wouldn't you feel a bit apprehensive seeing this symbol everywhere? On your health insurance, your checks? How would you explain your business card to friends and family? You just have to go all in on your evil lifestyle, and that's no way to live. Alright, so we're done. That was a long one, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Now, I'm sure there are dozens of awesome emblems and flags from across science fiction and fantasy that I didn't mention here, so please let me know what I missed in the comments. And is the symbol of the Earth Alliance actually brilliant? Does the Klingon insignia suck? Let me know what you thought of my choices here as well. And as always, our next episode will be out on Monday. I'd like to get you a hint of what it's about, but it's a little strange.
The Templin Institute investigates nations, organizations, and factions from alternate worlds and realities. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Do you have a suggestion for a future episode? Let us know by leaving a comment.